All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboys show coming at you guys, of course, after what was a disappointing game Thursday Night Football in a defeat 44-30 against the Detroit Lions. We've got a lot of interesting stuff to get to today when it comes to that game and what it means going forward and what exactly happened and how to digest what we just saw and all the really, really bad and some really, really good that we got from the game. There was some good. But I think there's a lot of things to really get into, and there's a lot of spicy stuff to really dig into today. But let's get things started, as we always do, with a stat of the day, a little palate cleanser, if you will. And this is courtesy of Tommy Yarish, and he posted this on X, and I thought it was pretty insightful. Aside from the last drive where they kneeled the ball out, the Lions' starting field position on average was their own 42-yard line. Tough night for the Cowboys on special teams. Yeah, couldn't cover kicks. Obviously, the turnovers didn't help causes either. The interception at the beginning of the second half, the Ferguson fumble gave them outstanding field position. I mean, the Lions got the ball at midfield basically every single return or pretty darn close to it, and that was just a special teams debacle. Aubrey had a phenomenal day. Williams stepped up with another block kick, but in terms of covering the kicks, Dallas was absolutely awful. And it definitely made the game a lot harder than it potentially could have been. Again, special teams is that third phase of the game that can obviously make things easier for your offense or harder for your offense or easier for your defense or harder for your defense. In a day where Dallas defensively just had a lot of struggles, obviously, they made it a lot harder for them. And I think that was one of the underrated aspects to the game, obviously, going into it. Not a lot of people thought the lack of return game from Dallas and the lack of coverage game for Dallas would have this big of an impact, but it certainly did against the Cowboys on the road, against a Detroit Lions team that obviously came in, played their hearts out. They knew their season was on the line. They're in the middle of a championship window, right? The Lions, this is year 3 of their title window. They have to win it, right? Although we're going to have to retool their roster. They're going to get more expensive. They're going to have a lot of challenges with this team going forward in an NFC North that's getting better and better and better. They knew this was a game they had to win, and they came out and executed. And credit to Detroit for what they did in all 3 phases of the game. But again, that underrated element, return game. And I think Kennedy for the Lions had a really nice day. On the other side of the coin is the Dallas Cowboys had an absolutely abysmal day covering kicks, and they've actually been okay at that pretty much all season long. Not the case on Thursday Night Football. And, of course, the turnovers, again, not helping out your defense at all with the good field position. You're surrendering to the Lions time after time after time again. All right, let's dive into this game here, and I posted this on X, and I wanted to talk about this because I think it's one of these things that's very interesting. So I wrote Dallas against Detroit outgained the Lions. They were better on third downs. Not that the Cowboys were good on third downs, but they were better than the Lions statistically speaking. They won the time and possession battle, had fewer penalties, and I didn't list it there in that bulletized list, but they had more first downs as well. I think 25-21, I think, was the final first down count. Now, you can argue the final first down count and the total yardage. You get a little garbage time there when the game was a 2-score game. At the very end, when it was 44-30 and the Cowboys, got 30 or 40 yards and moved downfield. But, at that point, I still kind of count that because it's one of those things. It wasn't like it was a 3-touchdown game with 5 minutes to go and you throw a silly 50-yard touchdown. Like against Denver when Joe Milton threw that touchdown. That to me was more garbage time. The game had been in doubt pretty much the entire game, although the Lions did make it a 3-score game early in the second half. The Cowboys actually were competitive and hanging around the entire game. It was a 3-point game with 8-9 minutes to go. And then a 7-point game with 4 or 5 minutes ago. This was a close game down the stretch, guys. And the Lions were clearly better. But if you look at the numbers here, what's interesting, and my final point there, in roughly 130 scrimmage snaps for the game, Dallas was as good or better in probably 90 of them. But in the other 40, the Lions eviscerated Dallas. And Shawnee mentioned it after the game, talking about the explosives, surrendering the explosives. And oh my goodness, was that just a disaster class. And this is a real problem, I think, with this Cowboys team going forward, is that they just have this ability to win, and we've seen it with third down defense at points, but they've sort of fixed that. Again, they're surrendering since the bye week less than 40%, including last night on third down, right around 37, 38%. That's upper half of the NFL. So they go from being one of the worst teams, the worst team on third down, into the bye week. Coming out of the bye week, they're now again top 10 on third down. A lot of that is the improvement with the additions of Quinnen Williams and Overshown into the mix, a guy who can play in space a little bit better. That's a huge part of it for sure. But the reality is the explosive plays just derailed them. And it was just a cataclysmic effect, whether it was Jahmyr Gibbs, whether it was Jameson Williams, whether it was Amon-Ra St. Brown, who, listen, either Amon-Ra St. Brown is just an absolute freak, or the Lions were very gamesmanshipy, I'll say it like that, with his injury. He doesn't practice all week, and he plays 90% of their snaps. I mean, he played 19 of their 20 snaps to start the game, for example. This is a guy that, going into the game, people said, listen, with the injury the Lions publicly released him as having, people said tiny chance he plays, and if he plays, super limited, and he's playing 95% of your snaps. I mean, I think that was a little gamesmanship from the Lions. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with that. I'm not, critiquing Detroit or anything, but that was definitely it was not a, either Amon-Ra St. Brown isn't a real human being, he's actually a robot, or you kind of hyped up the severity of the injury with your public disclosures. And again, it's gamesmanship, it happens. That's just the reality of it. But listen, the explosive plays absolutely eviscerated the Cowboys, right? The Montgomery run. You look at Jahmyr Gibbs, a couple big receptions. Jameson Williams, a couple big receptions. Amon-Ra St. Brown, a couple big receptions. I mean, it was just, and it didn't matter, right, who was covering it. It didn't matter the situation. Everyone gave him up. Marquise Bell, Deron Bland, Shavon Revel, Reddy Stewart, right? Kenneth Murray in space, Logan Wilson in space, right? There was just, name a Cowboys player that was in space, and they just got blown by against the Detroit Lions. And I saw a few people posting this after the game, and they said, well, was this an exhausted Cowboys team? Was this a team that just was worn down, 4 games, 18 days, an emotional roller coaster, emotional game against the Raiders, the comeback against the Eagles, and then they have to play 4 days later, and they get a big win against the Kansas City Chiefs. Are they just worn down? Maybe you can make an argument. I know the Lions have gone through a very similar schedule over the past 3 weeks as well. I do think this was a game that Detroit came into, I don't want to say wanting more, because I hate when people say it that way, but Detroit certainly treated it much more as a game they had to have, right? And to their credit, they did a great job. Their star players showed up. The Cowboys' star players, obviously CeeDee Lamb had his injury. He was playing great football, and that derailed that. But their star players for Dallas didn't show up, right? I mean, you look at Quinnen Williams, for example, who I don't think played poorly at all. But in terms of production, in terms of sacks, in terms of tackles for loss, not a whole lot there. Overshown had the worst game he's had since he returned back from the injury. You look at Deron Bland did not play well. You look at, of course, Pickens. I will say this about Pickens. I've been one of these guys that said, all right, let's dial it back on Pickens a little bit, because I think him and Lamb work great together. I said they do wonderful things together. Pickens is a talented player, but both of them together are special. And there's a lot of people now critiquing Pickens, and I said, listen, he had a rough game against Detroit, terrible game, worst game as a Cowboy. The reality is the Dallas Cowboys are only at where they were going into Thursday Night Football because of Pickens' performances. Obviously, in the 2 games leading up to that, he basically saved CeeDee Lamb's bacon against Philadelphia, finished out the game against the Kansas City Chiefs with a great fourth quarter. And, he's done a lot of things all season long. The fact that they were, they salvaged a tie against the Packers in large part because of Pickens, for example, right? So it's one of those things where the Dallas Cowboys without Pickens obviously were in a much worse position. I'm not saying you're allowed to have a bad game, but listen, CeeDee Lamb's had bad games. CeeDee Lamb's had games with bad body language where things are going poorly. Pickens has allowed it. Now, I do think people that were saying, oh, you need to extend him right away, give him all the money right now. Like, hold on, guys, let's let the season play out. This bad game and the media attention that's negative coming out of it, this is one of the reasons why you don't extend a player buku money right away, because you want to see exactly what he can be when the going gets tough. How good are you when all of the people in the media, they loved you a week ago, they called you the best thing since sliced bread, you're worth $40 million a year, $45 million a year, $35 million a year, whatever it is. And now every single person in the media is now the opposite. Social media commentators, they say you suck. They say you're lazy. They say you're a bad player, bad culture guy, all of those things. Right, that's what they're saying now. Now let's see how you respond to that. And that's going to be the tell with Pickens the rest of the season, right? Listen, when you're riding high, it's easy to feel good. Yeah, throw all the money at him. Now let's see how Pickens responds with some adversity with the Dallas Cowboys. And I think that's going to go a long way in determining what the Cowboys pay him. And I think they are going to pay him, and I think they should. But let's see what he does after responding to a very poor game. Again, Lamb had a bad game against Philadelphia, for sure. But he responded with a great game against Kansas City and a good game against Detroit 7 days later prior to the injury. Let's see what Pickens does after the mini-bye here as the Cowboys prepare for the final 4 games of the season. But when it comes to this game, and you look at who was playing poorly, and obviously you have to look at the defensive side of the football first. Listen, I think Revel's one of those guys. You play a young corner, a rookie corner. This was his fourth game. Tough matchup. Tough matchup, obviously, with a very good Lions, very veteran Lions offense. I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamison Williams, right? He's a guy that competed his butt off, competed his tail off. It just was a terrible game for Revel. And listen, rookies you're going to have it. You play Revel, by the way, so that you have these games as a rookie. You got to work through these lumps. You just have to. I think he competed. I think he played hard. I thought Jared Goff was fantastic. He had the best game of his season, I think, by far. He was under pressure a lot last night. I mean, it wasn't like I think he got hit 8 times. It wasn't like they didn't get any pressure on him. He did a good job, even when he was under pressure, delivering smart throws. Whenever the Cowboys went, sort of a more standard zone coverage, he very quickly and decisively hit the checkdowns, hit the short throws, and the commentary focused on that during the game. I think Herb Street mentioned a bunch, saying how decisive he was. And yeah, it's one of those things. If you play zone coverage and the quarterback very quickly hits a check down to a talented player like Gibbs or Amon-Ra St. Brown or something like that, you're in a tough position, because the whole point of zone coverage is to make the quarterback go, okay, long to short, and then you're rallying to the football under pressure, right? That's sort of the model. But if the quarterback is immediately diagnosed as the type of zone coverage and can hit the check down quickly before everyone can rally, you can be very successful. I thought when it came to run defense, it was very interesting. I thought 70-80% of the plays that were outstanding, and they just gave up massive runs on the other side of it. Now, I do think towards the end of the game, they wore down a little bit with some of those rushing attempts, but even then, they had a shot. The Lions were running the football, trying to kill the game late, and they got them to third down, or got them to second and long, third and long, and again, the big passing plays just did them in. It's one of those things. It was such a weird game. It reminded me a lot of the Cowboys, actually, interestingly enough, of the 2019 kind of era Dallas Cowboys, where they would big play people, right? They'd look kind of sloppy and ugly, but they'd big play you, right? 2021 Dallas was kind of like this at times as well. It would look kind of ugly over the course of a game sometimes, but they would make a few big plays, a Pollard, a Cooper, a Gallup, or whatever, a CeeDee Lamb if it was after 2000, by 2021, Ezekiel Elliott at that point as well too, and they'd find a way to big play you and put up a lot of points and a lot of yards. That's kind of what the Lions did against Dallas. Now, that's the good news for Dallas. Hey, listen, you still, you played okay on enough snaps to where you feel like you can get some momentum going forward. The problem is you give up 44 points, and I mean, that's inexcusable. It's just inexcusable, guys. I mean, we're at a point now that coming out of the bye, the Cowboys, the last 4 games, we wanted to see improvement. They're giving up 27 points per game, right? That's at this point coming out of the bye, a little bit more than that, about 27.3, 27.5, something like that. Going into the bye, they were giving up a little less than 30. Okay, we wanted to see improvement, and there's going to be aberrations, there's going to be volatility, but right now we're not seeing it, not enough. And I think that's a real problem with the Cowboys, and what they need to do going forward is seeing improvement. And that falls on their defensive coordinator, and it falls on their head coach for sure. All right, and on that note, I noted during the game, and a lot of people noted this too, I was far from alone in this fact. I said, Eberflus continuing to play Kenneth Murray is 100% a fireable offense. They substituted Logan Wilson in there a lot later in the game, and he wasn't playing like elite football, but Kenneth Murray is an embarrassment. Against the run in space, he's bad against everything. And to me, the fact that Eberflus trots out Kenneth Murray still as the starter. Listen, it would be different if Kenneth Murray was the backup who had to play due to injuries, right? If you started Logan Wilson and Wilson got hurt or whatever, right? And you're like, okay, we got to play Murray. He's the backup. He's forcing the game. We don't want to play him. We have to. That happens sometimes, right? We saw that, I think, last year in 2024 at times with Andrew Booth or Amani Oruwariye getting some snaps at corner because, Diggs was hurt and then Butler was hurt, right? Like, okay, you're down a couple guys. You got to play a guy you don't want to play. Kenneth Murray, they trot out as a starter every single week. And if he starts coming out of the mini-bye here going forward, then I don't understand how Eberflus can keep his job. And this also falls under a point I made during the game, and I think it's very important because we talk about Eberflus a lot. And listen, I've been a not fire Eberflus guy. You've been, listen, give him time. Let's see what happens, right? Because there's been some good, some really bad, and some okay. But right now, I think we don't need to look at Eberflus here, guys. But there's one man that deserves the blame for this failure defensively, and that is Brian Schottenheimer. Schotty failed this team. He has made every single decision, every tough decision, and we've given him credit. I give him credit for it in terms of doing whatever he can to put his team in a better position. Signing Jadeveon Clowney, right? Obviously a good move at the time. Benching essentially Sanborn, going with Shamar James, trying Shamar James. Benching Damone Clark with Maris Leafau, who, by the way, was a disruptive force last night. Did a good job causing some chaos in some situations on defense. Was good to see that. In terms of cutting Kyrie Elam, making go young corner, saying we're going to go youth movement. We're going to figure out our secondary in terms of the young guys now. We're not going to treat 2025 as if it's a must-win season for us. It isn't. Which, quick sidebar, by the way, a big indication of the Cowboys situation, when I'm sure a lot of you guys saw this who watched the broadcast, they had like the little funny metric. If you win, your percent playoff chances. If you lose, your percent playoff chances. If they won this game, they were still a big underdog to make the playoffs. So I think what they say, 39% chance. Guys, it's one of those things. At that point, the hole was too deep. Now, if they would have ran the table, and for sure they would have had a chance. But even if they would have run the table, guys, and finished 11-5-1, there was a very clear path for both Philadelphia and the wildcard teams to make the playoffs ahead of Dallas. So, it's one of those things. That's what kind of the analytics they were talking about. We're saying is that, listen, even if the Dallas Cowboys had won last night and won out the rest of the way, which would have been an impressive feat for sure, the reality is they still were not the favorite to make the postseason, not even close. So that's why you play the young guys. That's why you play Revel. That's why you start him in a tough environment. That's why you don't push Trayvon Diggs back. Compare that to what the Lions were doing. They pushed Amon-Ra St. Brown back and played him a ton. They absolutely had a beat up, at their tackles, questionable coming into the game. They all played, right? All the guys that were questionable played. And they had their safety, right? Brian Branch was questionable coming into the game. They played. He actually left with an injury, re-aggravated it. This was their biggest game of the year. This was a must-win for them this season because future is very questionable for Detroit after the season. They're going to have to make some contractual decisions. Not that they're not going to be good, but in terms of being championship good. They're in the middle of a championship window. I truly believe that the Lions are, right? Even though their record hasn't been as good as they'd like this season. The reality is the Cowboys are taking a different approach, and I do think it's the right one in terms of, listen, Jadeveon Clowney, we're not going to push it. Trayvon Diggs, we're not going to push it, right? This is not a season where we can go out and win a championship realistically. This is not even a season where mathematically they have a great chance to make the playoffs, right? Now they're still in it technically, and we'll see what happens the rest of the way. But I think, again, even with the win, they had less than a 40% chance of making the postseason. So if we're being real here, guys, making the playoffs after the start of the year, this wasn't something that was realistically in the cards. Now, when it comes to the fireable offense and Kenneth Murray and Shoddy and continuing to deal with the Eberflus situation, I'm very concerned. I am more down on Shoddy right now than I think I've ever been. Because at a certain point, you have got to do something about Eberflus and Kenneth Murray. Listen, the secondary and the big plays, you play a rookie, it's going to happen. Deron Bland has had a disappointing season. He's had great games, but some really dud games. Listen, the safety play, Marquise Bell, I don't know why he's playing. What the heck's going on there? Were there injuries there? Why do you have him matched up in man-on-man situations? I don't understand that. Right, that's another thing I don't get, but that's sort of a secondary thing. You can tie that, though, with Kenneth Murray. Why are you doing that? Why are you playing him that much? Why are you playing Marquise Bell that much? And I get maybe you're saying, well, we know Donovan Wilson's is gone after the season. Malik Hooker may be gone after the season as a June 1st cut potential. Like, we want to see what the young guys have. Okay, that could be the logic. But why is Kenneth Murray playing then? Like, I would rather Shamar James play every single snap instead of Kenneth Murray. I'd honestly rather see Logan Wilson, but I'd rather the interior linebacker rotation be Wilson over Shamar James, and Murray's benched or cut, right? If you're playing the young guys, they do that with Revel. They throw Revel into the ringer, and the kid is competing his butt off. Had a terrible day against Detroit. Tough atmosphere, tough environment. Hung in there and competed. Just a really rough day. But the reality is they're not doing that with Kenneth Murray. And Shawnee is allowing it to happen. You are what you allow to happen as the leader of a franchise. And Shawnee, to his credit, has not allowed a lot of things to happen. He was willing to bench Diggs before the Packers. He benched Lamb and Pickens before the Raiders, for example. Cut Kyrie Elam. Exchanged the entire secondary, the backup guys, after a training camp, right? He's essentially benched Jaden Blue. He's benched Jalen Tolbert, right? He's made all of these moves and that I think are really good culture moves, really good accountability moves. Set up a competition at right tackle, right? Obviously, Nate Thomas, good game against Kansas City, not a good game against the Lions, if we're being totally honest. But the reality is, he is allowing Kenneth Murray to happen. This is on Shoddy, and Shoddy last night failed his team. That's just a fact. Now, I'm not saying he's a terrible coach. I'm not. I think he's done a lot of good things. His leadership, the culture implementation, and we'll get to more of that a little bit later in the show today, and we all talk about it all the time, has been A+. What he's done with the offense has been outstanding. His relationship with Prescott is outstanding. People that don't like the game management, why didn't they go for it on fourth down? Folks, the reason they weren't in it against the Arizona Cardinals was because they kept going for it on fourth down. Right? Dak Prescott was playing on tilt in the first half. I mean, he had a 16-yard backwards fumble in what was the stupidest play I've ever seen. right? He had a couple throws he forced into tight coverage, right? He missed CeeDee Lamb for a wide open touchdown, threw it completely out of bounds, right? He just missed a ton of throws. He was all over the place. Take the points. I think that was the right move to make, 100% from Shoddy. Even after the fourth down play with Ferguson on one of the worst calls we've ever seen, right? When they called offensive pass interference, when it was at least defensive holding or defensive pass interference, it was a disastrous blown call. The officiating was terrible last night. I mean, it was an absolute abomination. Like, we'll get to more about that in a little bit. But I think the reality is that Shoddy correctly managed the game when it came to Prescott. Prescott was playing on tilt. He played well. I think he had a bad first half, a really good second half. The 2 interceptions were not his fault. But I think the reality is, I think Shoddy does a good job managing Dak Prescott and managing the game. Did a better job than he did against Arizona, where multiple fourth down attempts, instead of it being a one-score game late, instead of being 27-23 with a chance to win late, it was 27-17 with the odds stacked against him. Shoddy, again, taking those field goals, taking those points, kept them in the game. The special teams and the defense let him down. So I'm not hating the game management. A lot of people are hating the game management. I'm not. Right? Some people say you should go for it on fourth down. You need to be more aggressive. You need to be more gutsy. Literally a week ago, 8 days ago, the Detroit Lions lost at home to the Green Bay Packers in a very similar situation. They trailed most of the day. Defense had a hard time getting stops against the Packers offense. Dan Campbell kept going for it on fourth down instead of taking the points. I think there were 2 instances he did that I can remember, maybe even 3. He did the same thing against the Eagles earlier this season as well. And they lost both those games by 1 score. Right? They could have been leading in both those games. They were in a great position in both of those games, but he kept going for it, taking points off the board. Take points. There are some situations where it makes sense to go for it, field position, timing of the game. I understand all that, but you've got to take points. Everyone's saying that you should go for it all the time. It's not necessarily the right move, right? And I understand, well, your defense is playing badly. Your defense is playing badly. Listen, if your defense is playing badly, or your special teams is playing badly, take the points, and then you know who to fire. You know who to bench. Well, you need to manage the game better because your defense is playing badly. No, you manage the game the correct way. You implement the systems and processes and procedures to execute as if your defense is playing at a competent level, as if your special teams is playing at a competent level. And if you follow those processes and procedures and your special teams and defense let you down, then you fire those people on that side of the football. That's how this works, guys. You do not, my defense sucks, so I got to play abnormally. You do that, you lose. You're setting yourself up for failure. Do not do that. And I give credit to Shoddy for not doing that. But at this point, what is happening with this defense, specifically with Kenneth Murray and some other folks too, that is on Brian Schottenheimer. And that will, if he doesn't change it, whether it's this offseason or the rest of this year, that will derail him with the Dallas Cowboys. I truly believe that. I really do. Because you are what you allow. And right now, Dallas, with Schottenheimer, it's on Shoddy. He is allowing Eberflus to do this. He's put Eberflus in a position every single other time to make changes. He's forced changes. Remember, Eberflus started Damone Clark to start the season. Damone Clark's no longer a Dallas Cowboy. That's Shoddy leading that charge. Shoddy's been taking over meetings. He's been sitting in on meetings with Eberflus the entire season. Right now, Shoddy is allowing this to happen, and it is on him, and he failed his team because of this. And I'm not trying to destroy Shoddy. I'm just being honest with you guys, right? And I think a lot of you guys probably agree with me if you're being honest with yourselves. The offense is doing good things. Relationship with Prescott, good things. Culture, A+, right? Taking a long-term approach, not short-term. I love that, for sure, right? But the reality is you are what you allow. And this Kenneth Murray debacle, this Eberflus debacle with Kenneth Murray, Shoddy is allowing. And if he continues to allow it, he will not be successful as a head coach for the Dallas Cowboys. That's just a fact. And I'm not saying he needs to fire Eberflus today, or cut Kenneth Murray today. Could be an off-season thing, right? Could be something, hey, make a change or something like that. And it could be they just want to ride out the season, right? They're at this point, you don't know. Maybe Logan Wilson is just doing terrible in practice. Maybe Shamar James just has become a head case in practice and meetings, right? There are factors right there, of course. But if you continue to allow this long-term or allow this style of thing to happen long-term, then you will not succeed as a head coach with the Dallas Cowboys. That's just reality. All right, next report here. Talk about CeeDee Lamb is out tonight for his concussion. Obviously, people saw Lamb having a great day, just eviscerating the Lions. Again, it wasn't the Cowboys' day. I mean, CeeDee Lamb's literally just carving them up. He's probably going to have 200 yards receiving. They can't cover him. And he gets knocked out with concussion on a slightly errant Prescott throw. It's just one of those things. It's like, it's just not your day. The Cowboys basically immediately ruled him out. He was like, man, I'm fine. I said, nope, not even going to risk it. which again speaks to the difference in mindset, right? Again, the Lions, anyone that was questionable that could play, Amon-Ra, St. Brown, Branch, the offensive line, you're in there, right? The Cowboys, the moment Lamb might have a concussion, you're out. Don't even think about it. No second thoughts. Jadeveon Clowney, nope, you're not going to play, right? It just was a different approach. It was a different mindset. And one of the things I talk about with the Cowboys this year is that their plan has been clearly for the future. Every single step of the way, implementing the processes, procedures, systems, and over goals, essentially. And when teams tell you their plan, when they scream it like the Cowboys have, you need to listen. I mean, I don't even know if they waited for the independent concussion evaluation from the analysts. I bet their own doctor's like, we think there's a chance they may have a concussion. And I'm sure Shoddy can be like, okay, he's done. Set him out. Right? Not worth it. Now, you can argue whether it's the wrong or the right move, but that's the Cowboys saying, listen, we don't want to risk it. Not worth it. Right? It's not worth to try and steal a win against the Lions here on the road to improve the playoff chances to 39% in a season where we don't have a championship roster, far from it, where we're starting a secondary full of nothing but new guys and a bunch of new guys on defense in year one of this coaching staff to try and maybe eke it into the playoffs to potentially really cause long-term injury to our, in terms of concussion, brain-related injury to our star receiver. Not worth it. And I think that was the right move to make, by the way. That's again, the Cowboys' plan is for the future. They've been very clear about it this entire season, going back to January. Every move they've made, even their trade deadline acquisitions, all guys, multiple year guys under contract. I think the reality is the Cowboys are still taking that approach. I know we wanted them to win and we wanted them to win out, go on a magical season, just not in the cards. And they're taking that approach, right? And say, listen, if it happens, it happens. If not, we're not going to risk the future. All right, some positive stuff here. This is courtesy of Good Morning Football. This year's Walter Payton Man of the Year nominees and the Dallas Cowboy nominee is Solomon Thomas, who has been an exemplary figure, obviously with the Neyland tragedy, got a lot of attention on his causes off the field. But all of these guys, all 32 of them here, are phenomenal for their work off the field, so credit to them. It's a good thing. I love how the fact that the NFL incentivizes and encourages and publicizes good work like this. I think this is the right approach to take. You don't compel people to do good things. You want to incentivize good things. I think incentivizing good behavior is generally the right approach to take, and the NFL does a really good job of doing that with the Walter Payton Man of the Year nominees and how they make it a big deal. And of course, the award's a huge deal, and the patches and all of that. I think it's a good job by the NFL. It's a good idea by the NFL, and credit to all 32 of these guys on the screen here, specifically when it comes to the Cowboys. Solomon Thomas, for the work you do off the field. Nice job, and I think it's right that you guys get commended for it. All right, this next post here is from Stephen Mack talking about Mike McCarthy versus Coach Shoddy in December. Schottenheimer, of course, had his team ahead of playing the Detroit Lions in a dome, practicing outside in wind and rain over the past week or so. And Stephen Mack noted that if you go back to 2024, that Mike McCarthy was having, if it was wet weather potentially in Philadelphia, they would be indoors, catching a wet football. And you notice there at the bottom, you noted that a windy day will send the Cowboys inside to practice. This was on December 12th. I think it does speak to Shoddy again, systems over goals, right? He's not necessarily coaching for an individual game. He's not coaching for a comfort. He's not, coaching for country club mentality. He's trying to change the culture and change the mentality, which that he's doing and doing an A-plus job of it. So I think in that regard, he's done phenomenal. After the Neyland tragedy, he's been phenomenal. The offensive work him and Clayton Adams have done has been phenomenal, right? That's all outstanding. His play calling, for the most part, has been phenomenal. You can argue some game management here and there, but I think it's been fine. And I get it. Everyone wants you to go for on fourth down until you don't get it. Like Arizona, everyone's like, you got to take points, man. Right? What are you doing? Right? And now against Detroit, it's like, what are you doing? How do you not go for it? Why are you taking the points? I think at a certain point, Shoddy in all those elements has done pretty well overall, and I think he's done a good job this season overall. If you would have told me, after the Parsons trade that they'd be 6-6-1, they'd be 500 after 13 games. If you told me after the loss to Chicago, if you would have told me after being 3-5-1 going into the bye, that Dallas would be 6-6 right now, I'd say, yeah, I'd take it. 3-1 with the Raiders, Lions, Chiefs, and Eagles stretch there. 3-1 in that stretch. I'd say, yeah, I take it. That's for this team, right? First year with this new staff, completely new staff, new culture, a ton of young guys. I would take it, right? And I think as bad as disappointing as last night was for a lot of reasons, I think the overall trajectory is still positive, right? And I don't want to lose sight of that. There's some flashing red light warning signs that concern me for sure. But I think the overall trend is still a good thing, obviously, at this point. Now we're going to have to see how they bounce back, right? And I think that's going to be a tell the rest of the year, of course. Realistically, they're not a playoff team. I don't think they ever really were, unless everything broke right. Now, I understand they're not mathematically eliminated or anything like that, but I think the reality is Shadi is still implementing culture. He's trying to implement the systems over goals. His goal is not to find a way to sneak into the playoffs, maybe win a playoff game this year. His goal is to implement systems that will allow them to succeed in the long term. Now, whether they do or not, that remains to be seen. But I do think it's the right approach. All right, this is courtesy of Pro Football Talk. It was an interesting post yesterday. The folks at Carnegie Mellon have identified a new factor that potentially influences the success of an offense: unpredictability and the timing between pre-snap motion and the start of the play. And the kings in this regard are Mahomes and Brady. So it's not just motion; it's when you stop, when the timing of the snap in regard to motion. So if you bring a guy in motion and he crosses the quarterback and you always snap it 2 seconds later, you don't get as much of a benefit. But if you have a guy in motion and sometimes you snap it, when he's at one tackle, sometimes when he's at the other, sometimes when he's just past the guard, sometimes he runs all the way to the sideline, it creates a lot more, uncertainty and volatility in terms of how the defense handles that. And Mahomes and Brady, like the Pro Football Talk report notes, were outstanding in that regard. You know who else was, by the way? Jared Goff. Not just last night, but in general. Really good in this regard. Boy, oh boy, did Goff had a great game last night. Jared Goff, credit where credit is due. He had an awesome performance. The Cowboys got a lot of pressure, and I remember I think it was like a 2nd and 15 situation. Kenny Clark he's going to sack him. He's got a great pressure, and then he throws it 13 yards downfield at Jamison Williams for a big completion. It's a great throw, right? Throwing it downfield. When he threw it downfield, I'm like, man alive, is he throwing that away, or maybe there's a chance for an interception? And instead, it's a completion. And it wasn't terrible coverage. It wasn't like it was wide open, right? As much as I hate Marquise Bell in those matchups, again, what you allow. Why is Marquise Bell playing a lot? Maybe it's because they're trying to get the young guys some experience to see what they have. If that's the case, fine. But again, it's not exactly a good safety. I don't think he is anyway. But the reality is Jared Goff had a great game. Great game. He missed maybe 1 or 2 throws, but every single one of his misses was sort of like, it's a miss in the right spot. It's only where his receiver can get it. Great decisions, was decisive, took care of the football, didn't force any bad situations. The Cowboys played a lot of man and they played a lot of zone. They mixed it up. And Jared Goff was right on time and accurate every single time. Now, to be fair, you play a Cowboys very young secondary. So there's going to be some mistakes. There's going to be some issues. And listen, Eberflus did try and blitz and handle some things, and then Goff just eviscerated him with Gibbs, right? Because anytime you blitz against a team like the Lions, you're like, okay, that means we got to cover Amon-Ra, St. Brown, and Gibbs as hot routes. Can we do that? Can we get them down in the open field? And they couldn't, not even close. Now, it goes back to the Kenneth Murray problem, but still, right? Reddy Stewart struggled against Amon-Ra, St. Brown in those situations, right? It's Deron Bland, for example, got absolutely embarrassed by Jamar Gibbs in space. So it's one of those things where you get caught in a rock in a hard place, and they tried to mix it up and go more man late. It became just no matter what they ran, it didn't work. But the reality is, it's who you put on the field in some of these instances, and Jared Goff took advantage. He attacked Kenneth Murray, and he attacked the secondary all night long. And the Cowboys' interior D-line, I thought, was fine. I didn't think they got pressures. I thought Ezra Rocco had a tackle for loss and a couple other good plays, but, he didn't get a lot of pressure on Goff. I thought Houston had the 1 sack. I thought Sam Williams did a great job on the block kick, but other than that was not really anything. I thought Fowler had a couple decent pressures. They clearly missed Jadeveon Clowney. Edge rusher's a huge problem for them. Corner's a huge problem for them. Safety's a huge problem for them, and obviously linebacker's a huge problem. This defense has huge problems. Now, the good news is with corners that they're young, right? So you can sit there and say maybe they get better, maybe they figure it out. Trayvon Diggs is not the long-term answer because of how much money they're going to have to release with him in the offseason. But if you look at just where they sit, you're like, okay, Revel, more experience, could get better. Bland, again, disappointing season for Deron Bland, but he's, I think, a competent player. When you look at Kalen Carson, I think he's a solid depth piece. Reddy Stewart's a feisty nickel. That's sort of a okay group if they improve. Safety position is bad for sure. Linebacker is bad for sure, especially with whoever is playing opposite of Overshown, especially if it's Kenneth Murray. He's an F player. My point with Murray all the time is that, listen, Kenneth Murray's an F or a D minus. Logan Wilson may be a C minus, but a C minus is still a better grade than a D minus. Why are you playing the D minus? I keep going back to that because it's just like, what are we doing here, guys? What is the goal? He's not a guy who's going to be here long term. He's going to be gone this season. You're not developing him. Even when you played Shamar James, I was like, maybe you're just trying to develop him and get him some reps. What are you doing with Kenneth Murray? I don't understand it. And I keep going back to that. It is a failure of one man, and that's Brian Schottenheimer. He allows it to happen, guys. He allows it to happen. As good as he's been in other areas, in terms of what he's done with the offense. He's energized motion and timing with the offense, for example. Why does he allow that to happen? It just blows my mind. All right. Report here, finally. I thought this was kind of interesting. Just gives you an insight into the social media world. So this is a few days old at this point. This is from a Chargers X account. He writes, Chargers wiping the floor with Eagles will be all-time cinema. Generational moment for this era of Chargers fans. Chargers can become the only team to beat the Chiefs and Eagles this season. Super Bowl aspirations on the line. So this is, again, like just a fan account, just trying to generate a lot of views and a lot of engagement. It's got 320,000 views by the time I took a screen grab of it. It's a lot more now. Now, of course, anyone with 2 seconds to think about this can say, well, hold on a second. The Dallas Cowboys literally beat the Eagles and the Chiefs twice in 4 days. In fact, the Denver Broncos had already beaten the Eagles and the Chiefs this season. So the Chargers were not just the only team if they beat the Eagles, which they haven't done yet, of course, they would not be the only team to do it. They wouldn't even be the second team to do it. In fact, one of the division rivals has already done it. So this guy's is he an idiot? Does he not know football? Or is he just engagement farming? And the question is engagement farming, right? You see this all the time on social media. And listen, I'm part of the game too, and I understand it. But this is one of those things where if you see something like, are people stupid, or are people just, what are they doing here? They're trying to elicit a reaction, positively or negatively, to drive up engagement, which means more clicks, which means more subscribers, followers, revenue, whatever it may be. And that's just part of the game. So when it comes to things on social media, this is why I always like to focus on, either my own opinions, my own thoughts, the data, or good beat reporters that I trust, and kind of work back and forth to validate with. Because the reality is so much of what you see on social media, even from guys that mean well, it's just engagement bait, for lack of a better word. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, engagement bait's been around for forever. Newspapers have done it 100 years ago. Movie trailers are essentially like that, right? But the reality is you got to know what you're seeing. And right here, for example, this is a perfect example of just a guy who's just trying to drive up views and engagement with something that is blatantly false, just hilariously false. You just got to know the world you live in, and once you understand that, then you can go, okay, I can put that kind of stuff to the side. All right, let's get into the comments here, guys. Try and work through these. This first one is from Gus Theo 2537, member comment. Thank you, Gus. Hi, Nick. Quick question about the Bears. Didn't Flus build their defensive roster before he was fired? If so, that says something positive about Flus as defensive coordinator. Given the Bears' high turnover differential, are they mainly running a zone-heavy scheme this season also like Flus ran there? And is it now running in Dallas? Basically, how much of the Bears' current success on defense can be attributed to what Flus built during his time in Chicago? Thanks. Well, certainly a lot of the talent is there, right? If you look across the board of every single one of the good Bears defensive players, with the exception of, maybe a guy like Nashawn Wright, who's having a magical season, even though if you look at his numbers, it hasn't actually been that good. He has a lot of turnovers, but he's also surrendered more receiving touchdowns than any other corner. But for the most part, their star players, their key players, are pretty much all guys they've added, under Eberflus. Now, they added Grady Jarrett from Atlanta in the offseason, a key guy like that here or there. But for the most part, it's all Eberflus's guys. The scheme change has played a role. Al Harris, for example, is there as a cornerback coach. Turnovers and takeaways, they can, there are some teams that seem to be really good at them. Dallas under Dan Quinn was somehow very good, but I think there was a more Micah Parsons, Trayvon Diggs kind of, that mindset, the hyper-aggressive attack the football at all times, everything else be damned. And listen, that's just not sustainable, because when you get into big games, you get into playoff games, turnover luck can go one way or the other very quickly. And like what happened against the 49ers twice and then the Packers, they didn't get hardly any of it. I think they only got one turnover in those 3 games combined, if memory serves, and then you just lose 3 playoff games like that, right? So relying on turnover luck and forcing takeaways is not a recipe for long-term success, but Dennis Allen has come to Chicago and twisted that Eberflus mindset to be more takeaway-oriented. So the answer is some, but not a lot. I hope that answers your question. It's Juma3231 writes, I'm not against drafting running backs in the first round. We have the infrastructure to support them. Zeke, Saquon, and Henry are all prime examples of this. The issue with Jimty and Hampton have been, 1, their O-line sucked, and 2, Hampton got unlucky with a ankle sprain. Our O-line is probably top 5 in round blocking, so taking a running back like Jeremiah Love in the first round would be similar to drafting Zeke. That said, I want any of the 3 studs from Ohio State, Downs, and Styles. Love is the only offensive player I take in the first round, in my opinion. I mean, I think that's a very fair point. I think when I look at this Cowboys team and this just offense and just the entire roster, just defensively, I mean, defensive end is bad, safety is bad, linebacker is terrible, but theoretically they have the replacement in Logan Wilson. So maybe hold out there. Corner has some issues, right? So it's one of those things where I think you have to start with defensive edge, outside linebacker, whatever you want to call it. I would say edge, defensive end traditionally, and then safety. To me, are those top two needs for Dallas. But I think you bring up a fair point. I just think when you have too many other holes and too many other issues, both the Chargers and the Raiders have bad offensive linemen. Right now, to be fair, the Chargers have gone heavy O-line in the draft, so they've been trying to address it. They've had injuries. The Raiders have not, and it kind of doomed Ashton Genty's season. I think the Cowboys do have a better offensive line, but still, if the fact that Williams can have 1,000 yards rushing, which he hit last night, congrats to him, career high rushing yards with this O-line, I think is a sign, that they've got a good enough group where it's almost not worth the first round pick. Like, it's a kitchen and egg thing, right? A good running back needs a good O-line, but if you have a good O-line, you don't need your running back to be special to be successful. So unless you have a superstar player you really love, a Jahmyr Gibbs, for example, Ezekiel Elliott, a guy at that level, then you don't take him. Now, is Jeremiah Love at that level? That may be a fair question to ask, but I don't necessarily think it's worth it unless you truly believe he's that special of a playmaker. One up, D808 writes, "Sup, Nick, thanks for highlighting my comment, bro. Love your takes, and don't change that background too much. Straight to the cushion, no fluff." All right, yeah. Sticking with the boring white wall for you, man. That's what I'll do. Thank you for the comment and the nice words. All right, Delta 704, back-to-back comments here. Talking about a Grand Slam draft, hitting on your first 3 picks is massive. I'm still not out on Blue either. Redshirting Blue is not a bad idea. Give him the time to learn everything in the playbook while simultaneously not wearing him down for no reason. I think Blue still looks slow, like he's second-guess stuff still. Yeah, it could be a little bit of an issue with Jaden Blue there in terms of not trusting himself. That's a fair point. Redshirting him, is that the worst thing? Yeah, maybe not. We'll have to see. He also went on to write, "Love giving Revel all the opportunities over a guy who's not going to be here next year. That being said, if we actually do make a push, then we probably should start Diggs, assuming he looks good." Yeah, you take the good with the bad, right? Revel does some good things against the Raiders, does some other good things against Philadelphia, and has a solid game, not perfect, but an okay game against the Chiefs. And then just had a miserably, he was just awful. He was terrible last night. He competed his butt off. And now, when I say he was terrible, he wasn't like Traquise Bridges against the Denver Broncos terrible, where just nothing good happened. Like, I think he got beat just clean all the time, but it was pretty close. And I think that's the problem with Revel. Now, I think overall he's done a lot more positive things, but when you play young corners, play rookies, right, you're going to get that. And I think it's again, like he gave up a touchdown where he just sat on the route to maybe have a pass breakup and just played it terribly. It just was an awful play. Right, he gave some big completions over the middle. Right, sometimes he had good coverage. Sometimes he really didn't. It was just an awful game. But when you play rookie corners, a guy you like with good physical skills, who really I think had overall the last 3 games was certainly very passable, to put it mildly. I thought he'd been doing some good things overall. Just was a very disappointing game. But it's going to happen. You play rookies, it's going to happen. It's just the way it works, right? Ronald Alexander 5517, "I'm sorry, my brother, but people are dumb and they celebrate their ignorance. That's why the country is in the position it is in now. All you can do is protect their own mental health, because you would go nuts trying to find logic with illogical people." Now back to football. "When I see Revel, I'm just amazed at his size, but he still runs even with the wide receivers. If his knee holds up, I see visions of Richard Sherman, and that is why I am not sweating about Diggs. In my opinion, I am no doctor, but his knees are shot. We'll never know if he was with the team. His rehab would have been better, but we do know his way didn't work." Yeah, I mean, I hope his knees aren't shot just for him personally, but I don't disagree. That seems to be a serious concern. And again, Revel, I mean, it's one of those things going into, it was going to be a challenge for sure. And he just, when you play corner, you're going to have bad nights. I mean, it's one of those positions, it's like left tackle, right? You can, unless you're like the elite of the elite, you're going to have games where it's just a disaster, right? It just is. Football's just the NFL. It's tough. And if you're a rookie corner, a tough position, I mean, even Trayvon Diggs in 2020 had a disastrous rookie season and then kind of turned it around a little bit and then had a lot of takeaways in 21 and played, I think, his best ball in 22. So the reality is, I mean, your corners are just going to go through it sometimes. And that's what happened with Revel last night. Just a really rough game for the rookie. It's unfortunate to see. We'll have to see how he bounces back. But I do think he's got the potential, and the Cowboys are right to be high on him. It's just was not a good day for number 34. I mean, I'm trying to think here. He got beat for the touchdown, fell down on another, got beat for another big play. Had a couple other completions. He was in on. I mean, I think he's a good tackler. He's much more of an aggressive tackler than Diggs, which I appreciate. And he does have the good skill set and good size. So there's a lot to like with Rebel. Still, I'm not out on Rebel by any means, but boy, oh boy, just a rough night. It was a rough night for a lot of people, by the way, not just Rebel. All right, Fear No Man Trick 6813 writes, Nick, the real ones don't need bells and whistles, and you are a real one. Thank you, I appreciate that. Eric Mayo 9686 writes, Nick, you are doing an amazing job reading the insiders' information on health status developments. Are you doing through inside work from inside information to give us and our beloved team? You're doing an awesome job. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate the kind words. Terry Crow 2066 writes, I like your content, SMI, but when you start reading stuff to me that Joe Hoyt, Nick Harris, or No C wrote, I read it and then fast forward to the next one. Well, like I kind of talked about a few minutes ago, the reason I highlight those guys and I kind of read what they say is because, one, I want to give credit where credit is due. I just don't want to say, let's say if Joe Hoyt reports something or Nick Harris reports something, I don't want to just there and just regurgitate it and repeat it without giving them credit because they do the boots on the ground. If they do good work, I want to make sure I cite and quote them and show you guys. And that's why I usually say, hey, give this guy a follow, check him out. He's great, whatever it may be, because I want to give them credit because this is their livelihood, what they're doing there. So that's my mentality there. I understand you're like, listen, I don't need to hear you read, no see what he wrote because I can go see what he wrote. But the reality is I want to make sure I very explicitly and clearly give those guys credit for the good work they do. That's my goal there. HK-SG8WG, when it comes to Nate Thomas, I want to see how he does away from home when the crowd becomes a factor. I think he's only played home games this year. I might be wrong. Well, he played against the Jets, but they're not exactly a great home field advantage this year, and he had a terrible game against the Lions. It was a weird game last night, I will say, where it was so many things went wrong that could have gone wrong. It was obviously the horrendous officiating, which I don't want to get too much on the show. It could be something to talk about more later, but it was obviously horrendous officiating down the stretch against Dallas. It was just Nathan Thomas having the worst game of his life. It was Revel having the worst game of the season for him. Kenneth Murray having a disaster game. It was so many. CeeDee Lamb then getting hurt. Pickens having his worst game as a Cowboy. It was Ferguson with another fumble. It was one of those things. The Cowboys have had so many games this year where when things go wrong, it all seems to go wrong, right? Arizona, so many things went wrong. Of course, Denver, so many things went wrong. The Bears game, it's like this weird thing where it's either they play well or they play god-awful. And I think a big part of that, of course, is when you're a young team and a new staff, like I've talked about all the time this season. We play young guys. Nathan Thomas, young guy. Guyton, young guy. Beebe, young guy. Booker, young guy, right? Even Pickens is a younger guy, right? When you look at defensively, Ezra Raku, younger guy, Overshown, Shamar James, Leafau, everybody in the cornerback room, and at times a lot of safety play. When you play so many young guys, you're going to get volatility. You're going to get all over the map play. And right now, the veterans for this Cowboys, even Tyler Smith, a veteran guy, he's a young player, rookie, 22, right? We're talking about Deron Bland, Tyler Smith, and it's the veteran guys on this team. CeeDee Lamb is like the wily vet. Guy's like 27 years old. The reality is when you have a very young team, and what the Cowboys obviously are, you're going to get a lot of volatility, right? And that's what we saw last night. It's just par for the course sometimes. Stability comes with being a veteran team. The problem is you can be bad and be a veteran team, right? You can be stable and be terrible. Dallas right now is inconsistent all over the map and very volatile. When they're good, they can beat two of the better teams in football in 4 days. When they're bad, they get eviscerated by Denver. They get eviscerated by Chicago, and then they just lay an egg against the Detroit Lions last night. I mean, I know it was a competitive game down the stretch, but it was just a sloppy performance. It was just a game where it was just not well done across the board. Let's see here. Cole Knows writes, need a Lipke breakdown. He ran down GP on his big play on Thanksgiving. Guy's unbelievable for a fullback. Yeah, I have to look at Hunter Lipke. It's one of those things, depending on the game and the matchup, he sometimes gets more opportunities or less opportunities. Didn't do much against the Lions, but definitely something to consider going forward, looking at Lipke's film and seeing how he does. All right, well, that is the comments, guys. A few final thoughts on the game. Obviously, going to talk more about it in the aftermath going forward because they have their mini-bye. Listen, I will say, if you want to take a positive approach, is that if you told any point, when the schedule was released or anything like that during the season, if you just said, listen, with the Philadelphia, Kansas City, Detroit 3-game stretch, would you take 2-1 in that stretch? Yes. I think any team in football, if we're being totally honest, Would you, if the roles were reversed, if you take the Seattle Seahawks, if you take the Los Angeles Rams, contending teams right now, would you say 2-1 in that stretch? You'd be like, yeah, we'll take that. And so the Dallas Cowboys aren't a contending team, obviously, and they went 2-1 in that stretch, right? So, you take some solace there, I will say. But I think we know, going into the game, people are like, well, how good is Dallas? Are they a real contender? Can they go on something special here with the trade deadline moves? And I was always a little apprehensive of that because I was, it's like, well, they've got a lot of flaws defensively. It's a first-year staff. Their offensive line is, they've got some issues, especially with Guyton and Nathan Thomas. Terrence Steele as a pass protector as well. What are they going to look like? And the answer was special teams was bad. I'll say coverage was bad. Aubrey was fantastic, of course. And the defensive line was the interior I thought was good for the most part. I thought that the edges were okay at best. And I thought secondary and linebacker play was god-awful terrible, right? It just was. Now the Lions, again, they eviscerate, they move the ball up and down the field against a very good Packers defense. So again, the Lions are really good offensively, especially at home. Gibbs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, right? Montgomery, right? That's what they do. I think the Cowboys did a good job getting pressure at times. I don't think it was it wasn't like a game earlier in the season where they give up a lot of yardage, a lot of points. And it was like, they're not doing anything. Right, they can't get pressure on the quarterback. Their coverage busts everywhere. They're not even lining up right. The Lions just were better, right? They just better execution, better players when it comes to the offense-defensive matchup. But I think a lot of the Cowboys' issues, I think I trace it back to the head man because I think at this point in the season the buck stops with him, and he'd probably agree with that and say, listen, what are we allowing to happen here? Listen, I understand playing Revel, right? You're trying to see the rookies. You're trying to see the young guys. I really do understand that. I have no problem at all with that, actually. Just like I have no problem starting Ezra Ranku, although I think he's a better player. The reality is, though, why are you playing Kenneth Murray? Right? If you're playing Marquise Bell at safety, ostensibly because you want to give him reps to see how good or bad he is, why on God's green earth are you continuing to play Kenneth Murray? He's not going to play after the season. Right? And I'm not trying to pick on Murray here. I think there's just a clear contrast. And at a certain point, what you allow to happen is a real problem. Now, there could be an issue where Logan Wilson is slow picking up the defense. That could be very true. Logan Wilson could be doing terrible in practice. Logan Wilson could be, not integrating very well at all. That could be happening, and that could be the reason why. We're just like, listen, Logan Wilson just every day of practice, he just misses a call. He just has a blown assignment. And in that case, I would get it. I understand, there's all those factors. But boy, oh boy, just one of those things where it just frustrates me because without that knowledge, I'm just going to have to assume that that's not happening. Maybe it is, but I'm not going to until we have reporting that it is. I'm not going to assume that. So I think a lot of it does fall shoddy. The Cowboys have trailed. They played 13 games. They trailed in every single one of them, and they trailed by double digits in 6 of them. Right? Slow starts. That's a problem. That's a real problem. Now they fought back in all these games for the most part, right? Obviously, you look at the Broncos game being the exception, and I guess the Bears game too. Although I think they should have with the turnovers that kind of turned the game against them to make it interesting. But they fought back. It got interesting against Arizona. It got very interesting against Detroit. So offensively, just the Cardinals, they fell short, and defensively against Detroit, they fell short, and that's where they sit now. And that's exactly what the Cowboys are. They are a middling team with a quarterback that's playing good ball with a lot of great skill players, but are very inconsistent. The heat and the attack on George Pickens, I think, is going to come hot and heavy. I think people are going to go after Pickens. They've been wanting to go after him this entire season. They've been waiting to. And now they're going to get it. And we're going to have to see how Pickens responds. Because the media is going to destroy him. Get ready for it, guys. I'm sure they already are. The reality is that the Cowboys are going to have to figure out, what kind of team they want to be in the future. And it goes to Schottenheimer. He's done a great job resetting after the Nealon tragedy. After every single obstacle that seemed to derail everything, he's done a good job keeping this team being a feisty bunch. And we're going to have to see what happens the rest of the way. Again, they proved they're not a playoff team last night. I don't think anyone seriously thought they were a legit contending team this year. No one intelligent anyway. I thought they could have been a fun, feisty team. And as a fan, you certainly hope they can make a run. And they're still not out of it, of course. They're going to be playing meaningful football games, right? For the next, in December, right? So again, there's still something to be said for that. But we're going to have to see what happens the rest of the way. Last night was a major, major disappointment and a major setback. But again, a lot of things went wrong that, maybe going forward won't. They didn't get the calls at all. CeeDee Lamb got hurt, right? And they played a good offense that just eviscerated the young secondary and big played them to death. It's the NFL. Sometimes that happens. And listen, I'll be here tomorrow and every day the rest of the way to kind of break down the latest Cowboys news as they head into the stretch run in the month of December. I will say to end the show, I think the general trend for the Cowboys is certainly positive for the future. But right now, I got to say, this is probably tied with the Carolina Panthers, the most disappointing moment. Because both of those games, and especially last night, was an opportunity for the Cowboys to really show, okay, what can they do? And listen, I understand young team volatility, it's going to happen. But boy, oh boy, was that a disappointment. Ferguson playing poorly. Lamb getting hurt, not his fault, but it just happens, right? Prescott, rough first half. Special teams, kick coverage, terrible. Giving up the big plays on defense. Eberflus letting down against a good opponent yet again. There's just so many problems on this team right now. They've got a lot of good, but they got so many flashing red sirens here. And I think it's going to have to be a problem they solve in the offseason, a problem they solve in a big way. I think they've got some good pieces, and I think they've got a chance to do some good things in the future, for sure. But there are some concerns, and they're going to have to address it. And all right, guys, that's enough for today. A little bit longer show, obviously, than normal. But I'll be here tomorrow to bring you the latest Cowboys news, as always. And until then, I am Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.